Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take this chance to welcome you back to my channel. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk to you today about climate change early warning systems for risk reduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be able to present this to you by breaking it down into some small sub-areas. I want to look at the introduction to early warning systems. I want to look at sources of early warning, and I want to look at community-based early warning systems. And then I also want to look at the features of effective early warning systems in communities. I also want to look at the benefits of good early warning systems, and I also want to look at the stakeholders of early warning systems in community. And I won't forget to give you some of the elements of effective early warning systems. And also, how do we establish early warning systems that will stand the test of time, particularly in the wake of climate change? And then lastly, I'll give you an example of a community-based early warning system, particularly to deal with an issue like flood. In terms of introduction, ladies and gentlemen, we all know about climate change, and we've been able to talk about the causes of climate change and some of the impact that it has. And many things that we have talked about revolve around impacts like floods, landslides, earthquake. We talked about drought, flood, strong wind, thunderstorm, and lightning, and even diseases. We've talked about all this. So these are some of the disasters that are a result of climate change. And ladies and gentlemen, we also have related risks. If we have, for example, floods, landslides, volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and even lightning and thunder and even diseases, the results could be very dire. So they lead to risks such as injuries. So we also have loss of lives, we have loss and damage of property, including even the environment. We also lose livelihood, so we are not able to find what to eat. And so what normally happens is disaster risk reduction is a process that is supposed to prevent or manage or respond to the adverse effects of climate change, which will cause these disasters and risks we have mentioned. So this prevention, management, and actions that are towards reducing risks of climate change caused disasters will lead us to establishing what we call proper early warning systems. We want warning systems because warning systems are important information sources that will help us to adapt or to control so that we can have harmonious livelihood and even lives for ourselves. So typically we have the various sources. So we've been using government-initiated early warning systems. We've also been able to have intergovernmental or international agencies that are driving early warning, particularly of climate change. And we have also been able to have those that are originating from community, like community-managed early warning systems, as it were. When you look at the government early warning systems, and particularly in any country or countries, you find projects or activities which are initiated by government, and they are normally supposed to cushion people who are at risk of those disasters and risks that are caused by climate change. Many times they are top-down because this kind of early warning system by governments are normally conceptualized and in offices, but they are implemented in communities. To a large extent, even the communities are not given a chance to contribute into their creation, or they are not even being made to be participants during implementation. And even during the M&D, monitoring and evaluation, they're not part of it. So many people have accused that kind of approach as top-down. And to a large extent, it is not really reasonable, particularly with regard to the various situations that we experience in communities. Sometimes government will use models to develop early warning systems, particularly models borrowed from other places that may not find place in our communities that are having different contextual factors. So sometimes you find this kind of early warning systems not being effective in delivering the outcomes that they ought to do. So then people have also been able to use and rely on early warning systems that have been given to us by international agencies. We have to know that international agencies are important actors, particularly in regard to climate change responses. We have seen Red Cross or International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, for example. They've been able to support communities in responding in various ways to the impacts of climate change, including when floods strike or when we have even volcanic activities, the eruption of volcanoes, or when we even have flash floods that we've been able to experience in many places. So they have been able to come in handy to support, particularly with the humanitarian aspects, or including even capacity development. They develop a capacity of actors in climate change, particularly in responses. They have been also able to really bring in support, even financial support, aids that have been able to sort people out during times of emergencies. But people have accused such kind of methods as unreliable and causing dependencies. So communities generally continue to experience the impact or disasters that are caused by climate change. So then the other method that seems to resonate well with the community is what we are calling the community-led disaster risk reduction approaches, which boil down to what we are calling the community-based early warning systems. So since disasters normally strike communities, particularly poor population, it is important for these communities or poor populations to be empowered, to be educated, so that we are able to get them to be able to respond to disasters by themselves or on their own, so that they can help themselves. Because they live in obviously weak infrastructure areas. They also are very highly vulnerable to this impact. So the best we could do to them is to help them develop mechanisms of responses that they can use to address challenges of their time by themselves, for example. This is what we now refer to as community-managed disaster risk reductions, the CMDRR, as it were. So it is CMDRR, as it were, is an important community-based early warning system that is important. And the idea of forming it or coming up with it is informed by the works of very renowned scholars like Paulo Freire. For those of us who know Paulo Freire, he came up with the theory of participation, theory of dialogue, which we call participatory and dialogical framework, particularly with regard to development, and we can deploy it in dealing with community issues so that we are able to use community resources. We are able to use people within the community to be able to come together and address issues of their time together. So the following are some of the issues, some of the definitions that people give to community-based early warning systems that are supposed to be encouraged. People say they are actually a process of disaster risk management where you bring the community together, particularly community that is at risk of things like climate change. So you bring them up at the level of identification, analysis, and treatment, and even monitoring and evaluation of disaster risks that affect people in their community. So that when they do this, they aim to reduce vulnerability. They also aim to enhance the adaptability and capacity, for example. The other way by which we look at community-based early warning system is as a process which needs active involvement of people in the community. And we give them strong disaster communication and information. And we create awareness among them so that we could have that very inclusive communication ecology that ensures that they receive information and they use that information to be able to model behaviors and actions around alleviating themselves from such disasters. It also involves a process of creating early warning systems which are people-centered. We look at people-centered early warning systems, which gives people very timely warning information, written in understandable messages, particularly targeting all those people who are at risk and calling upon even other actors to participate together with them so that they can change the situation. It is also a case where there is decision-making about things that affect community and even implementing them revolve around the collectivity of people in that place. And so it involves activities and measures and even projects which reduce disaster, particularly at the level of communities. And here, what do? we normally come up with the disaster risk plans. These plans are developed through a consultative process. They include things that work with the particular community. So you can imagine as having different disaster risk plans depending on situations or depending on communities, because communities differ. It's a people-centered approach that will empower all individuals within at-risk areas. And if you see communities that are in disaster-prone areas, and so you bring them together in an appropriate manner so that you use their resources, their locally available resources, to institute measures that can get them out of those disasters. And that is what we are calling it. To a large extent, it works at 3 levels. It works in promoting, creating knowledge of threats, and communicating change. And so when we promote knowledge about threats that are imminent in our communities, if we communicate about these threats that we have, and then we help build a kind of intervention, and then we rally one another to behave or to implement such intervention that will then get them out of that threat, then that is at the heart of what we call an effective early warning. So essential features of a very good early warning systems in the community would be like, if you involve all vulnerable communities, involve every people at all levels, the designing, implementation, and even control. So when you don't do it in offices, you do it in community, and you bring in people who are going to really use it or depend on it. It also includes participation of all actors in the community, and we know so many actors are abound. We also empower all these actors, including those who are actually more prone to disaster risks. We empower them. Sometimes you might find that there are people who are from low socioeconomic group in our communities, and there are many. They are majority, around 80% in every population or every community. So you empower them, and then you conceptualize an intervention which is very specific to community, so that you don't have a generalized framework that can be applied at global, maybe regional, and even national levels. So climate change strikes at different levels in our community. And where people are is where you bring the intervention that is connected with their culture, connected with their way of life, that makes sense to them. You rely on the primitive knowledge, the IK, indigenous knowledge of the community, to build something that will work for them. And you encourage ownership of the framework that you will have developed. So this one has a lot of benefits. It gives notice of the impending danger, for example. It's a way in which we gave an example of an effective CMDRR that works. And you will see that people rely on it to give them notice of impending disasters. Anytime there is going to be a disaster, they are aware in time. It also reduces casualties that we are having, or even the dangers that are caused by climate change. It encourages people to even move to safer grounds, particularly when they know that there's an impending danger. It also saves livelihood, and it saves lives. It saves the community and community resources that we are having. It leads to sustainable development if it is community initiated, community run, and the community are the ones who implement it, and community are the ones who monitor and evaluate whatever goes on there through that approach. Then it becomes more sustainable, much more than we would be thinking about in the national approach to disaster management, or even the national or government approach to disaster risk reduction. It discourages dependence on government. We longer days when people will say government come and help us to address issues of flood, issues of volcanic eruption, issues of environmental degradation that are resulting from climate change. Now, in constituting an effective CBEW, community-based early warning systems, then you look at the actors, all those actors that we are having. The general public is the number one actor. They're the primary actor here, because they're the ones who are most risk and the ones who are targeted to be able to change their behaviors in terms of disaster risks. You also think about the risk managers. In every community, in every organization or institution, we have disaster risk people. We also have community leaders who are supposed to be part and parcel of community managed disaster risk reductions. We also have members of the risk management committee. You think about the committee that will handle disasters when they come. And then you also rope in the security personnel, the army, You look at the people in service so that they can help you with controlling things when climate change strikes. You bring in humanitarian agencies that are going to help people with evacuation, provide food, provide shelter, and provide the services that are required during times of emergency or times of problems. You also bring the media to be able to support in providing people with information. You also bring all other collaborative networks that exist so that it does work. So some of the elements of effective community-based early warning systems would revolve around risk knowledge. So you have to do what we call risk assessment. You collect and analyze information so that you can have a database which contains information around disasters and risks and even the timing when they are expected to occur. And then you do monitoring and warning services. This one will be around you mapping the contributory factors to the risk that we are talking about. So you are able to control them. You are able to have stakeholders to check what's going on. And then the third one, you disseminate and you communicate around it. You come up with the means of communicating disasters, very effective. To some extent, you would use different channels or multimedia. You can use media that is specific to that community to be able to pass information to the vulnerable population. You use the locally available media resources to be able to reach out to each and every person. They could be interpersonal, they could be group, could be public media, could be mass media. And currently, even in the era of new media, social media, you could institutionalize this so that you can pass information very adequately. And then you have response capabilities that we are thinking about. So what are the various ways of responding to early warning information or early warning messages? You give people options on how they work, and you choose the kind of responses that will elicit the practices and behaviors or even habits that you require, or those that will change the beliefs, change even the attitude of people towards conceptualizing the dangers of disaster and risks that are caused by climate change. And so we lastly go to how to establish an effective community-based early warning systems. How do we go about it? Stages that I'm mentioning, like preparation and needs assessment, participatory analysis of situation, observing and monitoring, communication, preparation, and all that. So we look at each one of them very quickly. How do we prepare? Look at preparation and needs analysis. So I've been able to mention a couple of things, like you determine the needs of early warning systems. So you don't just start it without commissioning a small study which tells you about the need. Do we have disasters that have hit the community before? How severe were they? Then you look at the vulnerability of the community that is there. Who are vulnerable? Where are they found in that community? You look at the existence of groups. Do we have existing groups in that community? Do we have, what is the capacity level of the whole community? So you analyze those factors. And then you have what we call participatory situation analysis. You can have that. And how do you go about it? I just mentioned you do it through hazard assessment, vulnerability assessment, and capacity assessment. You even do mapping that can get you a clear picture of the communities or situations that you are dealing with. Then the third one is observation and monitoring. It involves monitoring of risks. So we had already talked about data that you had. You had a database. So now you have a means of collecting information around disasters that will then be dependable by communities. You build it through observation, you build it through consultation, you build it through taking assessment of risks that have happened in that place. And then you institutionalize the fourth one, communication. And then you prepare the response strategies that I have mentioned. And then you do a lot of M&E, like follow-ups, reviews, and you check the sustainability of the methods that you have put in place to address those risks that are caused by climate change. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to now give you an example of a community-based early warning system, particularly that you can use to deal with floods. I've been able to say that there are a number of actions, there are a number of community-led actions that can be used to address disasters that are caused by climate change. And these are dependent upon a given community because they're supposed to be context-based. This is also dependent upon the kind of calamity, the kind of risk that is being experienced by the community. But one way of looking at them, for example, in communities that are experiencing floods, could be if you build dikes. Dikes normally channel water away from the vulnerable community. We have seen a lot of them being done. We can also go with building gabions, and you know what gabions will do. Gabions will even alter the speed of runoff. Some of them can even change the direction of water. So if the community experiences frequent floods, then you could do that. Apart from building dikes, you can also engage spars and gabions that will help redirect. And then you can also build watchtowers. Watchtowers are very important resources that are normally used by people who monitor, particularly effects of swelling or of floods. And you find people scaling the towers and checking around what's happening. Then they are able to blow sirens or sound sirens that will give people indication of the coming of the flood calamity. Other times you can use rain gauge. It is possible that you can have a community rain gauge that helps to check the parameters like precipitation. You can have that at a small scale. You can also build bridges. Bridges could be avenues through which people can escape when flood disasters strike a community. You can also build emergency shelters in open spaces. Like you can have shelters in schools, on grounds that are raised so that people will go there when disaster, particularly flood, emerges. You can also have emergency life jackets and even emergency lifeboats. We have a lifeboat concept in places that are flood prone, for example. So if floods come even in the middle of the night, people will go and into the boat and even have the life jackets that they will use. You can install the meteorological stations around to be able to help people. And then, most importantly, you build the capacity of the villagers. You do training, you do workshops, you give them exposure so that they know about the issues of disasters like drought and how they manage them. You also encourage them to plan their irrigation system, particularly if it's an agricultural community. You also advise them to be able to use sound agricultural practices, like contour plowing, for example. So if they're plowing, they do that which can help manage floods, for example. You can also help in institutionalizing drought-resistant buildings, for example. So you construct buildings such that when floods come, it will not affect them. There are so many ways you can go about it. You can even also have community-led humanitarian agencies. People have thought that humanitarian agencies are just foreign people or people who come from the government or who work closely with the government. But we know that we can have local level humanitarian groups whose works will be just to address problems that come in the communities. Then we have setting up of small early warning committees. In every village, we have early warning committee, the committee whose work is supposed to do monitoring on behalf of the community. Then we would be having quite a lot of service if we were to go by this and to be able to decide and institutionalize community-led disaster risk reduction, particularly community-based early warning system. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to go any further than that. I want to just recap by saying that today I just did talk to you about critical things like early warning systems, the sources of early warning systems. Then I concentrated on community-led early warning systems. I told you about its constitution, essential features of that, the stakeholders that are there, the elements that must constitute it, on how to establish it. And I gave you an example of an effective way to manage floods as disaster risk caused by climate change in communities. Allow me to stop there for today, and I want to remind you not to forget about liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel for many more helpful talks. Thank you. Welcome again.